this third module is really, and actually there's a slide that we typically present that we don't have here today, where we sort of have student success situated at the top of a pyramid, called our pyramid of student success. At the very bottom of the pyramid, we have the concepts related to relationships, authentic, caring, trusting, relationships that are based on mutual respect between the student and the educator. And at the middle of the pyramid is the effective teaching and pedagogy strategies, right? So the challenge is that oftentimes when we think about what does it take to be a good educator, to be an effective educator, we focus primarily on that middle part of the pyramid. How well, how well do we know our content? How organized we are? How good are we at giving feedback to students? Things like that, things that we know are important to the educational process, but we know for the students population that we're concerned about, we absolutely cannot ignore the base of the pyramid, right? So if we think about this in from the perspective of a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, at the very bottom of the pyramid where Maslow talks about safety and food and things like that, well, those relationships, the positive and trusting relationships between the students and the educator are really at the base of the pyramid, right? That we cannot ignore that. That it doesn't matter how well you do the things that are in the middle of the pyramid, if you cannot establish relationship with these guys that are really grounded in trust, mutual respect, and authentic care, well then the chances of you being able to reach them and them maximizing the opportunity that they have to learn from you are going to be far, far less likely. So with that, and what we do in the third module is talk about what are the things that we can do, what are the strategies that we can employ as classroom faculty and as counselors, as advisors, wherever we may be situated, to build the types of relationships with these students that we know are critical to their success and critical to us being able to reach and work with them. So we also talk about 4 elements of faculty excellence. And this concept is based off a scholar. His name is Naveed Sanford, who wrote in the 1960s. Anyone that's taken or taught a student development theory class is probably likely familiar with these concepts. But he says this, that if we want students to learn, if we want students to do well, 2 elements must be in place. We have to challenge them and we have to support them, right? And there has to be an optimal balance between the two, right? Because if we challenge them too much, what happens? Right, they get frustrated, they lose confidence, self-efficacy erodes, and they give up, right? They say, okay, I'll never, so this is like me in my high school calculus class, right? I'll never be able to learn this stuff, right? Forget it, why bother? But if we provide too much support, what happens then? They get lazy, right? We coddle them. The expectations aren't where they need to be. They don't learn anything because we're not really challenging them. We're not pushing them to their academic. We're not getting them to maximize, really their academic talents and so forth. And we would say on the surface, this is a good theory. This makes sense. But for men of color, there are 2 other elements that are typically missing from this framework. You can challenge a student to no end, right? Challenge them as much as you want. If these guys don't feel like you have high expectations and that you actually expect them to be able to rise to the challenge and meet the challenge, well then there's a lost opportunity there for learning, right? So challenging the student has to be accompanied by high expectations where students know, yes, Professor Jones is challenging the heck out of me, but it's because he really expects me or she really expects me to be able to really meet these expectations, right? Very high expectations, has very high expectations for my learning and my performance. And with support, there's an element that has to accompany support as well. And it's this, authentic care, right? For these guys, and I would say this is generally true for most underserved, students who've been underserved in education. They have to know that you truly care, that you are invested in their success. That when they do well, you're going to be proud, you're going to be pleased. And when they don't do well, you're going to be disappointed, right? So there has to be some recognition that there's a real caring concern, not just for how well I do in calculus, but for who I am as an individual and for my success as an individual, right? And these 4 elements are in place, are critical not only to the learning experience, but also to that base of the pyramid of being able to build the types of relationships with students that we know, with men of color, that we know are critical to their success. So once we sort of unpack and talk about these concepts, we actually start to talk about, well, why are positive relationships so important, and what are the dispositions that are fostered by these positive relationships? Well, there's some things that we talk about earlier in the course where we really sort of roll up our sleeves and get into what are the lived experiences of men of color in educational settings, in most educational settings. So we talk about stereotypes, we talk about the assumptions of criminality, and all the things that we know influences and impacts the ways in which educators, the assumptions that they make about these students' abilities, men of color's abilities to learn and be successful, right? And by and large, we say, what we often communicate here is that what we typically see when a man of color enrolls in community college, we see years and years of really poor relationships with educators, years of poor experiences in educational settings, right? That really has a real intensified negative effect on their disposition towards how they see themselves as learning, right? And their expectations for their own success, and their expectations for the types of relationships that they're going to have with educators, right? All of those things are really woefully low. So we talk about why it's really important to tend to this part of the teaching and learning experience. We also talk about the importance of looking at the teaching and learning experience as not just this transactional thing, right? I'm Dr. So-and-so, I come to class, I have all this knowledge and information that you don't have, and it's your job to decode and figure out what it is I want you to learn, and every few weeks I'm going to test you on it, and if you don't give me the answers that I want you to have, then I'm going to give you a bad grade, and if you get too many bad grades, then I'm going to fail you in the course, and you're going to have to take this course again, right? And it's become sort of this cat and mouse game. But we say we have to stop thinking about the teaching and learning experience as this transactional experience and thinking about it in a much more relational context, where there are times where, yes, because I've completed a degree and I've had some schooling and I have some expertise on this subject, that I'm going to, I've been asked to lead our learning in this course. But at times, I'm going to have to reposition myself. At times, you're going to have to be the teacher, and I'm going to have to be the learner, right? Because in a real in a learning experience that's really rooted in relationships, we think about, Paulo Freire's work, right? Where we all come to the learning context as teachers and learners. And it's my job as the facilitator of this learning experience that I empower my students to be able to sort of recognize what it is that they can contribute to this learning experience and provide space and opportunity to do so. Well, why is that? Because it creates a much more positive disposition towards learning, and it really helps to challenge and sort of mitigate all the negative stuff that's occurred before they've even gotten to my classroom, right? It really helps to kind of to repair a lot of damage that's typically done when we think about the typical learning experiences of men of color, right? So we talk about all those things. And then we actually get into, say, okay, in light of all that, in light of all the theoretical stuff, what are the things I can do when I go to my classroom on Monday and I have a group of students here? What are some of the things I should be doing? Well, we actually get into some actual strategies. Positive messaging is one of the strategies that we think is really important, right? Recognizing that most of the messages that men of color have gotten from pretty early in their schooling experience has been largely negative, right? So we have to make sure that we create an environment that welcomes them, that welcomes their engagement, that we are very strategic about saying things and doing things that lets them know, Michael, Ulysses, whoever it may be, right? You have something that's very important to contribute to this learning environment. We have to greet them when they, and not just men of color, but we have to greet all our students. It's great to see you here. I'm looking forward to the conversation we're going to have. I really like the response that you posted on the Blackboard site in response to the reading, and I'm hoping that there'll be an opportunity and you'll feel comfortable sharing that with the course, right? Sharing that with the class. So really being strategic about conveying messages that lets them know, A, you're capable of being successful here, right? You are quote unquote college material despite all the things you may have heard in the past.